That's good.
Is it recording?
Yeah. Okay.
You're right there. Hello and welcome to H-Karts, coming to you from on the road, just coming out of Huddersfield because this is meeting 3 of the BUKC, coming to you from Llandow. For the first time since 2016, the BUKC visited Llandow in South Wales, and to ensure a smooth journey to the circuit, we rented a house near Maesteg for 2 nights and headed there on the Friday evening rather than risk a traffic jam on the Saturday morning. And it was a rather lovely house, although for some reason Ollie Milner was trying to gouge his left eye out. Other highlights included multiple shots of a sleepy Aaron Walsh and James Brickles's rather strange choice of breakfast. Once we arrived at the circuit, we went on our obligatory track walk, and Milner seemed quite eager to get to the front of the pack. Another driver who was quite pleased to be here was Alex Gunn, who had missed the last round at Wigan, while Kezia Santoso and Stephen Letts were already spinning. Also, Sam Turn forgot to have breakfast, so he went for a cup of tea and half a Welsh flag. First up, on a track that was only slightly damp, were A Team's Aaron Walsh starting 21st, and B Team's Jack Linus, who was 10 places further back. Both drivers made up places at the start, which was more than could be said for Swansea B, and both continued to make up places, with Walsh forcing his way past Aston A on lap 3 and Linus getting ahead of Southampton B on the next lap. The racing Linus was one of the few Huddersfield drivers to have raced at Llandow before, and his experience showed as he then battled with Walsh and eventually got ahead on lap 7. He had the measure over Captain Chaos, but he also got a bit too friendly with one of the cones and accrued a penalty. Despite this, Linus finished in 14th, 1 place ahead of Walsh. Neither team were out for race 2, which saw a fair bit of jostling on the first lap, but not enough to cause an accident. That was to be saved for the next race of the day, which saw B Team's Ollie Milner starting 20th and A Team's Stephen Letts starting so far down the order his kart wasn't even on the grid. The start saw decent first laps for both drivers, while Kingston A found the grass more to their liking. The aforementioned accident happened when Coventry C ran wide at the exit of McWhirters, spun in front of the pack and caused a small chain reaction. This is what it looked like from Ollie Milner's perspective. On lap 7, rain began to fall, which might have caused the live timing to have a massive strop, and the safety cart was brought out to calm the electronics down. It was also around this point when Letts received a black flag, allegedly for an ABC takeout, although Lichfield's lieutenant said that he had overtaken someone who then spun off. As the incident wasn't captured on some sort of camera lens, what actually happens will forever remain a mystery. Luckily, the moment Milner received a penalty was captured, so let's talk about that for a bit. After the race restarted, Milner made his way from 7th to be in the middle of a 3-kart scrap for 3rd in the closing moments. He overtook Coventry A with just a few minutes to go going into McWhirters, but it was judged by JV himself to be a bump and pass. It wasn't quite as simple as that, as Milner's onboard footage showed that he received a slight nudge from Cambridge A, which then propelled the man with the golden Volvo into Coventry A. 4th on the road became 8th post-race. Never mind, could be worse. Earlier in the race, Coventry B witnessed a collision between Cranfield A and Warwick B, and even though they were nowhere near the incident, Coventry B got the black flag for it. Now that was seriously unlucky. As for Letts, his phantom black flag had dropped him down to 27th, but the safety carts meant that the field had closed up, which allowed Letts to do what he did best, storm his way through the field. Multiple overtakes, avoiding pile-ups such as this one, and not receiving any more penalties meant that somehow he finished 5th. Race 4, and with Letts having started the previous one from dead last, Sam Tern started this one from dead first. It was his first time at Llandow, and before the race, he was asked why he had never been to South Wales before.
I don't want to say the people, but the people. Maybe the sheep and the people.
Let's quickly move on and mention the other Huddersfield driver starting 17th in this race, Llandow, who was making the upgrade from intermediates to mains. The start saw Tern lose the lead to Manchester Metropolitan, although he quickly regained the initiative halfway round the first lap, while Quick Clear was battling with the likes of Warwick B and Cranfield A, though thankfully no collision this time. Tern's lead was somewhat comfortable at the end of the first lap, but it became clear that he had drawn the short straw with his kart, as Oxford Brookes A took the lead on lap 4, and then two Loughborough drivers forced their way past the turntable at the final corner. As the race progressed, he slipped behind Coventry A, Birmingham A, and then found himself battling hard with Nottingham A for 6th in the final stages, which eventually went the way of Lewis Bickers, so Tern had to settle for 7th. Meanwhile, Llandow spent a solid chunk of a race battling with Coventry B before falling into the clutches of the chasing pack, which once again included Warwick B, and she eventually finished 23rd. Race 5, and although it was a closely fought race, we were out in the back somewhere enjoying a nice hot baguette from the cafe, so it's on to the final race of the sprints, which featured A Team's Alex Gunn starting 15th and B Team's Kesha Santoso, delighted to be starting 5th. She held her own at the start and moved up to 4th, while Gunn was in the process of making a good first lap, but coming into the Dell, Gunn was smothered by about half the field and then wiped out by the other half, which left him stranded on the grass. Apparently he was so angry that he turned a deep khaki colour and became extremely muscly. Despite her good start, Santoso was struggling with the handling of her kart. In the early part of the race, it was quite nicely balanced, but a bit of contact with another driver at 1/3 distance generated a lot of understeer, particularly in the left-hand corners, and as a result, Quick Kes dropped down the order and eventually finished 20th, 2 places ahead of the recovering Shotgun. So after a series of unfortunate races for Huddersfield, the A-Team finished 14th overall, with Stephen Letts' comeback drive being their highlight, while the B-Team were 26th overall, which, believe it or not, was actually a massive improvement from their 41st at Wigan. Rain was on the way to spice up the entirety of the 3 endurance races, but it was dry for the start of race 1, which saw just the A-Team out with Aaron Walsh at the wheel. The start went by rather cleanly, with Captain Chaos battling with Oxford Brookes C for 15th. A few laps into the race, the rain began to fall, but Walsh was too busy battling with Brunel B to notice the lack of visibility. The precipitation wasn't enough to properly moisten the circuit, and shortly afterwards the rain had stopped. But then it came back with a bit of a vengeance on lap 12, and Walsh chose this moment to pit. Unlike our previous endurance races, a driver change occurred during this stop, with Sam Tern taking over, partly because he likes the rain, but mostly because if Walsh had carried on without a wetsuit, he'd have probably drowned. The different tactic sort of worked out, as the turntable made it into the top 10 by lap 23, but the rain had stopped and the track began to dry out. Tern demonstrated the increase in grip by having a spin at the final corner, and picking up a cone penalty, which he seemed oddly proud of. A few minutes after the second pit window opened, Tern came into the pits to hand the kart back to Aaron Walsh, who had finally put on his wetsuit to accommodate for the now dry conditions. It was a slightly longer stop than normal due to having to queue behind Coventry B. Only slightly longer though, so don't worry too much, Coventry. 5 laps into his second stint, the wetsuit proved to be a good idea, as the rain once again returned and stayed for the remainder of the race. Despite going a lap down, Walsh showed some very strong pace in the wet as he unlapped himself and battled with Nottingham Trent A. He eventually finished 15th, having overtaken Exeter B on the final lap. The second race featured the B team, with Ollie Milner starting 29th, but he's another driver who likes the rain, so he was looking forward to this race. Probably. The first lap was particularly delicious, as Bristol A were tipped into a spin by Oxford Brookes B, while Leeds A and UWTSD Swansea gave each other a hug. Milner gained 8 places on the first lap, and he was flying as he surprised Exeter B out of the way at the start of lap 3. Shortly after the pit window opened, Milner received a signal to make his first pit stop, but he had time for a cheeky overtake on Cranfield A going into the hairpin before making a fuel stop. Although he was getting flirtatious with the curbs, Milner was up to an incredible 4th place, which then became 3rd after overtaking Birmingham A, a move which the man with the golden Volvo thoroughly enjoyed. He was flying, but drivers behind him were flying even higher, and Milner had dropped to 5th before handing over to Cleo Chinardi. With 10 laps to go, she was tipped into a spin by Nottingham A, which normally would have been judged as an ABC takeout, but no penalty was given. In the end, it made no difference to the finishing position, as Chinardi brought the kart home in 13th. The final race of the day saw both teams in action, with the A team starting 19th and the B team starting just a little bit higher up in 7th. Despite the increasingly wet conditions, the first few corners went by very cleanly. Sort of. It then got a little bit rough as Linus received a few nudges, including one so firm that it actually switched the engine off. Linus retained 7th at the end of the first lap, but Stephen Letts was already in the top 10. Sadly for the A team, any chance of victory ended early with an ABC penalty. Probably because of this. Despite this, Letts displayed his ability in the wet by storming into the lead on lap 8, with Linus showing equally encouraging progress by moving up to 3rd on the same lap. Although Letts had a comfortable lead after his first stop, the draconian penalty system meant that it was impossible for the A team to win, and then at 1/3 distance, it became impossible for the B team to win as Linus received his own ABC penalty, which actually happened when another driver decided to turn into him going into the Dell, so obviously that was Jack's fault. Things got worse for the racing Linus, as with the rain really belting down, he got his braking a bit wrong going into Surtees and converted his go-kart into a bowling ball. He scored a strike and a black flag, which only dropped him from 3rd to 5th. When the second pit window opened, it was Aaron Walsh's turn to hold the board out for both drivers, and he seemed happy with his newfound responsibility. Linus pitted first so he could hand his kart over to Keja Santoso, and then a few laps later, Letts handed over to Alex Gunn. It was a quick pit stop, and thanks to Letts' electrifying pace, the A team retained the lead, even if they weren't allowed to win. A few drivers were finding the metaphoric swimming pool a bit tricky, such as Manchester Metropolitan, whoever this spinner was, and Brunel A. With 8 minutes left to run, the A team received another penalty, this time for overtaking under yellows, although Gunn said afterwards that he had overtaken the backmarker before the yellow flag zone, so understandably he was a bit livid upon learning the news. Meanwhile, Santoso battled with the aggressive microclimate of South Wales and brought the kart home in 20th place, while thanks to their 2 penalties received during this race, first on the road became 9th for Letts and Gunn. At least the shotgun had fun, while Quick Kez described her race as one of the hardest she's ever done. Before we get on to the overall results, let's just take a moment to do some quick maths and work out what that particular 8th place penalty for the A team equates to in terms of time. According to the live timing, Huddersfield A finished 47.6 seconds ahead of the team that moved up to first, which were UWTSD Swansea A. 9th on the road were Warwick A, who themselves were 45.2 seconds behind the race winners. In a nutshell, Huddersfield A received penalties totalling at least 1 minute and 33 seconds. Holy shit! Linus's black flag only cost him between 25 to 30 seconds, so the A team could have had 3 black flags and still finish 8th. Even holier shit! So after another series of unfortunate races for Huddersfield, the A team came 12th overall, which could have been 10th under the old penalty system, while Huddersfield B came 19th overall, which was a significant improvement from their second from bottom in Wigan. As for the championship, that was as good as over for both teams, so Wilton Mill will almost certainly see a rather different philosophy of going out there and just having fun. Speaking of which, Round 3 of the Intermediates Championship took place the following day, with conditions having transformed from a deluge to a lovely sunny day. The lineup for the C team was the same as in Wigan, with the exception of Aston's Tom Fox being Yorkshire for the day. But the lineup was suddenly altered as back in Huddersfield, Ben Hinchliffe's alarm went on strike, so Luke Bath ended up taking part in races 2 and 3, while James Brickles was out for race 1. He qualified 6th, but a stuttering engine at the start meant that he dropped a couple of places on the first lap. He then lost another to Bristol B, who then decided to generously hand that place back to Coneman by spinning at McWhirters. Brickles then spent the next part of the race chasing Bath B before becoming embroiled in a battle with Strathclyde's Elon BUKC for 6th, which got tasty when Brickles tried an accidental lunge going into the hook on lap 12 before doing it slightly less accidentally a couple of laps later. The slightest of nudges from UWEA then dropped Brickles down to 9th before embarking himself in another duel, this time with Chester's Tom Jones. Attempt 1 at the hairpin. Unsuccessful. Attempt 2 going into Chandler's. Unsuccessful. Attempt 3 at the hairpin. Unsuccessful. Attempt 4 at the hairpin on the final lap. Successful! Brickles finished 8th in what he described as possibly the most fun race he has ever taken part in, and with his day's racing done, he resumed his second job as the videographer. Luke Bath was next out for the second race of the day, and he had a particularly quick field to deal with as he was starting from 15th, but he was on it from the first lap as he moved up to 10th, but then back down to 15th on the second lap because he wanted to even out his workload. We presume the cone had said something offensive to one of the drivers. Bath had made his way back up to 12th when he made a move on Leicester B, which ended with a little shove and a rejected friend request. Bath was deemed to be at fault and received a black flag as a result. Although he dropped to 32nd, he went on a charge, battling with Sheffield Hallam A and at one point pulling off a splendid triple overtake going into McWhirter's. He eventually finished 21st, having been offended by a different cone. After Luke Bath came Luke Bath II for race 3, and his karting qualifying was very much to his liking as he qualified 5th. A little bit of rain before the start made the track slightly damp, which Bath actually prefers, and he had a tremendous start to briefly move up to 2nd during the first lap before once again finding his qualifying position more preferable. His kart, however, wasn't, as a lack of grunt meant that he couldn't challenge for the win, much like that stranded kart over there. Eventually, Bath finished 8th, which all things considered wasn't too bad. The final race featured our honorary Huddersfield driver Tom Fox racing inelligibly, but it's still worth reviewing, especially after he qualified on pole position with the only sub 52 second lap of the entire meeting. If only he actually went to Huddersfield. He maintained the lead during the first lap, which saw Cardiff C being pushed off the circuit and responding by doing some exercises with their right arm. Another Welsh team was also in the doldrums, as Swansea D made it as far as the tyre barrier at the exit of Surtees. On lap 6 the heavens opened, so much so that our videographer got scared and hid underneath the climbing frame, but once the shower stopped, he made his way over to the final corner to capture some action between Aston B and UWEA. Meanwhile, Tom Fox had dominated the race and won by an almost unbelievable 40 seconds. If only he actually went to Huddersfield. So despite Luke Bath taking part in 2 races, they both ended up being eligible for points, and as a result, Huddersfield C came 12th overall, and with the championship standings now incorporating the results from qualifiers, they sit 14th with an outside chance of making the top 10 after the final round, which will take place at Wilton Mill in a couple of weeks' time. The individual drivers' championship will be taking place there as well, and 4 of our drivers will be participating, all in the lightweights class: Sam Turn, James Brickles, Aaron Walsh and Jack Linus. H-Karts would like to thank all our sponsors, and stay tuned and see you soon.